The Young and the Restless spoilers in the sun-drenched hills of southern France. A storm was brewing beneath the polished veneer of wine tastings and coastal opulence. The Young and the Restless had never shied away from scandal, betrayal, or deeply buried family secrets, but what was unfolding in Nice was darker, heavier, and more volatile than anything Genoa City had seen in years. The sudden stabbing of Damien Kane inside Kane Ashby's lavish villa shattered the illusion of a sophisticated getaway and exposed a disturbing undercurrent of malice and manipulation. The scene itself was chilling: blood on the marble floor, a shattered glass of bourbon near Damien's outstretched hand, and an open window that suggested either an escape route or an entry point. For Kane, the shock was palpable, but even more unsettling was how quickly the finger of blame pointed at Nick Newman, who had also been present that night, with only blurry footage, circumstantial whispers, and a trail of misfortune shadowing his every move. Carter, Kane's elusive and often unreliable assistant, became the immediate person of interest. His behavior had grown increasingly erratic in recent weeks. Missed calls, vague alibis, late-night errands for his boss, and a tendency to insert himself into conversations he had no business being in. His proximity to both Damien and Nick on the night of the attack made him an easy scapegoat, but even as Victor Newman began to pressure French authorities for answers and Sharon tried to make sense of Nick's arrest, it became clear that Carter's presence may have been orchestrated, part of something much larger and far more sinister. This wasn't just about a stabbing. There was now talk of a sexual assault cover-up, a sickening parallel thread that tied into Damien's final days and made the entire house of cards even shakier. For viewers, the question wasn't simply who stabbed Damien. It was, what were they trying to silence him from revealing? Just as the tension began to boil over, rumors spread like wildfire through the soap opera community, whispers of a familiar face long presumed gone. Colin Atkinson. The name alone was enough to cause shivers, especially for those who remembered the chaos he left in his wake the last time he surfaced. Kane had claimed that his father had died, even speaking of the loss in hushed tones, his voice strained with something between grief and guilt. But in the world of daytime television, death is never permanent, it's merely a pause in a storyline waiting to explode. If Colin was alive, and if he had returned to Europe under a new identity or false passport, then everything suddenly took on a new shade of suspicion. Could he have been lurking in the shadows of that villa in Nice, watching the tensions unravel between his son, his rivals, and a man like Damien, whose secrets could potentially destroy more than one reputation? Tristan Rogers, the iconic actor who originally brought Colin to life, had stepped away from the role amid personal health challenges. But The Young and the Restless had quietly recast Kane, a move that subtly reopened the door to recasting Colin as well. With so many pieces in motion, and with fans already bracing for a long game of misdirection and emotional chaos, bringing back Colin would be a masterstroke. He was a man who played chess with people's lives, who blurred the line between paternal devotion and sociopathic control. If Colin believed Damien was threatening Kane's happiness with Lily, or worse, if Damien had uncovered something damning about Colin's own activities, then his motive for murder was not only clear but terrifyingly logical. And framing Nick? That would be the kind of twisted psychological punishment Colin would relish. An attack not only on Victor Newman's son but on the very legacy of a family he despised for years. The genius of the unfolding plot lay in its ability to disorient everyone. Nick, already haunted by a past riddled with impulsive decisions and a short temper, found himself in a familiar but unbearable position, alone, accused, and fighting for his freedom. Sharon stood by him, but her instincts were clouded, especially as new surveillance footage emerged showing a hooded figure near the pool just minutes before the stabbing. The grainy footage offered no clarity, only more confusion. Was that Carter? Was it Damien himself staging a bizarre play of self-sabotage? Or was it someone else entirely, someone who knew exactly when to strike and how to vanish? As for Kane, the stress began to chip away at his carefully constructed facade. The man who once seemed so composed, so in control of his destiny and the women in his life, now appeared paranoid and volatile. He questioned Carter relentlessly, pushed Lily for support she was hesitant to give, and began lashing out at anyone who even hinted at his possible involvement. Amanda Sinclair, always the cool-headed legal mind, began to question whether defending Kane was worth the professional and emotional toll it was taking on her. Especially after an anonymous tip suggested the knife used in Damien's stabbing had been part of an antique set in Kane's private wine cellar, a detail only someone intimate with the property would know. Meanwhile, the sexual assault storyline began to unfurl in gut-wrenching layers. Hints that Damien had been investigating a hidden scandal involving a powerful figure in Genoa City, perhaps related to incidents that occurred years ago but were buried under non-disclosure agreements and corporate payoffs, began to emerge. Damien had spoken cryptically to Phyllis days before his death, referencing someone who wasn't supposed to be there that night. He had recorded conversations, fragments of testimony, and potentially had intended to go public. Was that what got him killed? Was his murder not about love or rivalry but about silence, a brutal erasure of truth? The speculation only intensified when Nikki Newman began receiving threatening notes, warning her to stay quiet about what happened at the lake house. Victor increased his security, but even he seemed rattled when Carter disappeared for 2 days, only to resurface with no memory of where he had been, his hands scraped and his shoes caked in mud. It was too convenient. Too rehearsed. Victor suspected he was being played, but he also feared something bigger, that the attack on Damien was only the first move in a campaign of terror designed to destabilize the Newman family from within. And in the background of all this chaos, a figure walked through the streets of Nice, sunglasses low, an old scar running just beneath his ear. He ordered espresso with a shaky hand, picked up a copy of the Genoa City Chronicle, and smiled grimly at the front-page headline. Newman heir faces attempted murder charges in French scandal. The man folded the paper and walked away into the misty morning air. Whether it was Colin or a specter from someone else's past remained to be seen, but one thing was certain, the war had only just begun. With multiple threads now converging. The stabbing of Damien, the false narrative against Nick, the potential return of Colin, and the buried history of a sexual assault that could implicate some of Genoa City's most powerful men. The Young and the Restless was preparing for an emotional detonation. The audience was no longer asking if someone would be exposed, they were asking who would survive the fallout. Because in the grand chessboard of power, vengeance, and secrets, the next move could either save a family or destroy it forever. If you'd like, I can now expand on specific parts like Colin's motivations, the assault investigation, or Nick's descent into paranoia in a follow-up section. Let me know what direction you want to explore further. If there was one thing the citizens of Genoa City had learned through the years, it was that Colin Atkinson never did anything without a purpose. And his methods were always layered with precision, cruelty, and a touch of theatrical flair. For a man who had spent decades manipulating hearts, embezzling fortunes, and slithering in and out of lives with the ease of a phantom, orchestrating a murder to protect his son's broken marriage would be not only plausible, it would be personal. And in the wake of Damien Kane's bloody demise at Kane's villa in Nice, the trail of emotional carnage began to reveal a chilling pattern. This wasn't merely a crime of passion or a drunken mistake, but rather the meticulous hand of someone who had studied every angle, every weakness, and every thread that could be pulled until it all unraveled. Colin's motive ran deeper than simple revenge or loyalty. He had always been a man obsessed with control, of wealth, of situations, of people. His bond with Lily Winters had always been strained, even artificial at times, but he admired her poise, her intellect, and more than anything, the way she anchored his son. Without her, Kane had always been vulnerable, prone to reckless decisions, emotional spirals, and toxic entanglements. When Lily walked away, Colin saw not only the fracturing of a family but the collapse of the only structure keeping Kane sane. And when Damien entered the picture, younger, smoother, and dangerously close to Lily's heart, it wouldn't have taken long for Colin to see him as an existential threat, not only to Kane's happiness but to the Atkinson legacy itself. But for Colin, simply eliminating Damien wasn't enough. No, the blow had to echo, to reverberate across oceans, across bloodlines. That's where Nick Newman entered the equation. The son of Victor the Mustache Newman. The same Victor who had humiliated Colin in the past, outmaneuvered him in private investments, and warned him to stay away from his empire. Colin never forgot a slight, and with Victor's attention constantly revolving around the protection of his children, what better way to strike at him than to frame his golden son for a gruesome murder? To place Nick at the center of a sordid European scandal involving not just murder but potential sexual assault. That was a masterpiece of vengeance in Colin's eyes. Because Victor wouldn't simply lose a son to disgrace or prison, he would lose his legacy, his name, his iron grip on the Newman reputation. And the beauty of it all? Colin didn't need to reveal himself to do it. In fact, staying dead, officially, at least, gave him the perfect cover. Kane's own claim that his father had passed was convenient, perhaps even orchestrated by Colin himself, knowing full well that playing dead was the best camouflage. From the shadows, he could observe the chaos unfold, the police arresting Nick, the media sensationalizing the Newman downfall, and Kane stepping into the emotional void left by Damien, reuniting with Lily under the guise of grief and support. Every piece was arranged to maximize damage and further Colin's ultimate goal. Restoring what he believed was rightfully his, through his son, and punishing those who dared to take it. But the question still lingered like smoke in a locked room: was Colin truly alive and behind it all? There had been no confirmed sightings, no fingerprints, no voice recordings. Just a phantom silhouette in Nice, a suspicious smirk from a man who vanished behind a cafe curtain. Some whispered that the scarred figure seen in the CCTV near the Ashby estate matched an old mugshot of Colin from years ago. Others insisted it was Carter, or perhaps even someone Damien had owed money to. But when Amanda Sinclair began digging through old Newman International files and found references to a shell company once operated by Colin in Montenegro, a company recently reactivated under an alias, the suspicion became harder to ignore. Lily, despite her reservations toward Colin, began to feel the tremor of doubt beneath her feet. She had never trusted him, not fully, but she had never imagined he could be capable of coordinating something so vile, so cold. Yet, as the puzzle pieces continued to lock together, the truth became harder to deny. A man like Colin would do anything for his version of family, even if it meant killing someone he deemed expendable and crafting an elaborate trap to destroy the son of his enemy. And in the twisted theater of his mind, that wasn't cruelty, it was justice. What remained to be discovered, however, was whether Colin had also orchestrated something even darker, the rape that Damien had reportedly uncovered and was preparing to expose. If so, that would push his crimes into a territory even more unthinkable. Could Colin have assaulted Nick during one of his drugged moments in the villa, not just to ruin him, but to utterly humiliate him? Or did he merely stage the scene to look that way, trusting that the media and the courts would do the rest? Nick himself, still struggling with memory gaps from that night, began to wonder what was real and what was planted. The bruises on his wrist, the scratch marks on his back, the single torn shirt that didn't belong to him, all of it suggested a night far more violent and psychologically devastating than even he was ready to admit. Victor, meanwhile, had begun to suspect the impossible. If Colin was alive, then his absence from the scene was strategic. That meant Victor wasn't fighting a random threat or a disposable pawn, he was once again facing an old enemy, a ghost who had mastered the art of war. And this time, the battlefield wasn't the boardroom. It was his own family. What was most terrifying, however, was that no one truly knew Colin's endgame. Was this just about Lily and Kane? Or had he returned with a longer list of people to destroy? Would Amanda be next, for digging too deep? Would Sharon become a target for standing beside Nick? Would even Victor himself find his empire crumbling under the weight of forged documents, planted evidence, and psychological warfare? The Young and the Restless had delivered many villains over the years, power-hungry CEOs, obsessed lovers, sociopathic family members, but Colin Atkinson, if truly behind all this, was emerging as something far more dangerous. A mastermind who didn't just manipulate lives, but rewrote their endings. In his world, justice was personal, family was currency, and revenge was art. And as the sun set over the French Riviera, and sirens wailed in the distance while Nick sat in a cold cell replaying horrors he couldn't fully remember, one thing was clear: this story was far from over. And if Colin was indeed back, then Genoa City had better prepare for the next chapter, because the King of Shadows was just getting started.